Power wears dust on its boots and a signet ring under the cuff. It is quiet in a way that unnerves the room because it does not need to announce itself. It arrives early to the deal table, listens longer than anyone else, and leaves with a signature that looks like a whisper. In Texas, where fortunes rose from the stubborn ground, wealth learned a particular grammar of restraint. A ranch gate that does not bear a name. A jet filed under a holding company with a neutral moniker. At dinner, the talk is cattle and weather, while the lawyers discuss basis, royalties, and trust situs in the next room. This is not performance. It is habit. It is the ritual of money that intends to last. Oil taught these families to think in flows rather than piles. A gusher is a story, but the check that lands every month is a system. Mineral rights in the United States grant private citizens what kings once held. From this odd legal quirk came the architecture of the modern family office. You do not merely own a field, you own a stream of payments. Lease bonuses, delay rentals, royalties on every barrel lifted, overriding interest stacked like invisible shingles on the title. Someone must track division orders, reconcile run statements, and watch the decline curves. Someone must hedge exposure when West Texas Intermediate turns against the calendar. That someone becomes a staff, then a department, then a family office with a chief investment officer, a tax director, a trust lawyer, and a book that runs like an institutional fund. Consider the Hunts. H.L. Hunt arrived with a gambler's instinct and a ledger's mind. His children inherited mineral acres and something more valuable, a machine for converting commodity luck into permanent capital. The office had to manage operating interests, midstream stakes, and non-operated royalties that needed to be audited well by well. The task is not glamorous. It is reconciliation. It is cost depletion versus percentage depletion. It is deciding when to convert working interests to net profit interests to reduce operational headaches while preserving cash flow. On paper, this looks like a stack of schedules. In real life, it looks like a family that can go on living well even when oil falls. The Hunts also offer a cautionary footnote. In the late 1970s, the famous silver adventure began as a hedge against inflation and ended in a lesson about leverage and liquidity. A family office is not a casino. It is a ballast. The better offices learned to separate operating bets from treasury management. They wrote investment policy statements the way a refinery writes process control diagrams. Counterparty exposure is capped. Collateral is monitored daily. Stress tests are not for banks alone. The point is endurance, not drama. Across Fort Worth, the Bass brothers inherited the ashes and embers of Sid Richardson's drilling genius and lit a more modern flame. They engaged professional management, embraced contemporary portfolio theory, and treated the family balance sheet like an institution. The office became an allocator rather than a collector. It owned companies outright when that made sense, took minority positions when influence could be purchased without the burden of operations, and rotated between public securities and private deals with the cold patience of an actuary. When the office bought into a business, it arrived with more than money. It brought a governance template, the discipline of quarterly narratives, and the subtle threat that the capital would leave if the story bent away from returns. The legal chassis of these fortunes is simple to describe and difficult to execute. Begin with a family limited partnership, place the mineral interests, the pipeline units, and the real estate inside it. Make a management company to run operations and charge an arm's length fee. Use limited liability companies as sleeves for specific assets, each with its own insurance stack. The partnership throws cash to the partners, who are often trusts. Some trusts are grantor trusts, to keep income on the founder's return for planning flexibility. Others are generation skipping, built to jump over estate tax events and live longer than any one surname. If state law tolerates it, move trusts to a jurisdiction that is generous with perpetuity periods, creditor protection, and decanting statutes. You may see Wyoming or South Dakota on the letterhead even if the brand is pure Texas. Inside this chassis, basis is sacred. The office tracks original issue discounts and acquisition dates, like a cartographer. When an asset is sold, it is usually part of a larger choreography. Losses harvested in one sleeve offset, gains realized in another. A like-kind exchange can be considered when the asset is real property. Mineral interests, often treated as real property under state law, may step across into new properties without triggering immediate tax. The point is not to avoid the law. It is to navigate it with the precision of a drilling engineer steering a horizontal well through a narrow pay zone 2 miles below a town that never knows. Risk is not eliminated. It is priced and placed. Commodity price exposure meets hedging desks that speak in collars and swaps. Operating risk is fenced inside separate entities with thin, appropriate capitalization and proper minutes. Concentration risk is argued about in investment committee meetings, where uncles still tell stories but the spreadsheet gets the last word. Liquidity risk is monitored like a vital sign. Oil is illiquid. Disney shares are not. The office balances the two, so that family life does not depend on the price at which a private buyer is willing to rescue a tired asset. Philanthropy is not a costume in this world. It is a ledger line that does work on both sides of the family story. Foundations anchored by oil wealth grant to museums, universities, hospitals, and sometimes to the geology departments that train the next generation of mineral mines. Endowment management becomes a testing ground for the office's ideas about allocation. A foundation portfolio that survives recessions without impairing grants is a calling card in a town where people notice who kept their promises when prices turned cruel. Behavior completes the structure. In the better houses, there is an education program that does not look like a lecture. Heirs learn to read financial statements the way earlier generations learned to read cattle. They sit in on vendor meetings. They watch mineral title attorneys argue over a comma in a deed written before their grandparents were born. They learn that control is sweeter than ownership and that governance, if done right, feels like air rather than iron. Marriages come with prenuptial agreements that are not acts of suspicion, but instruments of clarity. Liquidity events are celebrated with a calm dinner and a revised investment policy statement. From the outside, the family office can look like a fortress. From the inside, it is a plant that does not sleep. Cash comes in from upstream and midstream partnerships, from manufactured housing communities bought when cap rates were kind, from timberland that throws off a steady yield while absorbing a family's sense of time. Cash goes out to taxes, to philanthropy, to reinvestment, to distributions that are designed to keep personal appetites modest and the flywheel turning. The office is a place where yesterday's gushers are translated into tomorrow's options. There are myths here. People say the money is in the deal. The money is in the discipline. People say genius was the father of fortune. Patience was the mother. Oil provided the first act, loud and cinematic. The family office wrote the second and third, quiet and exacting. The Hunts and the Basses are not identical stories. One warns against heat. The other applauds cool. What they share is the understanding that wealth is a system of decisions repeated correctly for a very long time. In a century that changes its fashions every season, endurance is the most radical taste. A good family office is not glamorous. It is a back office staffed by people who love footnotes. It is a tax calendar pinned like a map. It is the reconciliation of division orders and the weekly letter to the family that explains why an opportunity that looked pretty was still a pass. It is the pride of a patriarch who knows his grandchildren will never need to call a private banker for permission. It is the silence of a matriarch who signed the trust documents and asked no one to applaud. The wells that made the money will decline. They all do. Yet the families who organize their lives around a system rather than a story have discovered something remarkable. A barrel sold a lifetime ago can still be working in the portfolio today, not as oil, but as dividends as rent rolls, as the compounding of 1,000 careful choices. That is how a wild landscape taught order. That is how a commodity became a dynasty.